So this morning we are starting, as you saw, in the book of Exodus. Now, before we dive into the book of Exodus, we need to remember at least the last story of Genesis, because the way Exodus starts off, it starts off in this first chapter, it just assumes you know the events of Genesis. And so I don't want to assume anything. I know the Bible does, but I think refreshers are a good thing. So to kind of refresh our mind, the end of Genesis ends, like the last story there was the story of Joseph. And Joseph is the one, he's the son of Jacob. He was the youngest one, and he was very favorited by Jacob, so much so that Jacob gave him a multicolored coat, and it made all his other brothers very, very jealous. And since they were jealous, they plotted to kill him, but then they're like, nah, let's sell him into slavery. So they sell him into slavery. And then there's a bunch of unfortunate events that continued putting Joseph through hardship after hardship after hardship. He thought things was getting better, and then hardship. But it all ends up to a very fortunate event that ended up putting Joseph second in command of all of Egypt, meaning that only Pharaoh himself had authority over Joseph. And then through that and through this, there were 7 years, years of plenty. There was a famine. Because of Joseph's plan, he got to do all these things in Egypt because he trusted on God and he had the visions and everything. And through this, his family, his brothers came to Egypt, and then, through some trickery and some fun things that he did, what ended up happening is Joseph ended up bringing his entire family to Egypt, where there was plenty of food and everything. And they came and they moved into what was called the Delta region. It's next to the Nile. It's very luscious land. It's very beautiful there. And so Joseph and his family, they all settled right there. So now, a couple hundred years have passed since those events. And Joseph and his whole family is now dead, but their lineage, the generations, they continue to grow. And then they grew so much that they are now known, they're called the Hebrews, which just means foreigner. But this is what they had. The Hebrews had grown to a very, very large people. And this is where the story of Exodus picks up. And so this is where we're going to pick up. This is Exodus chapter 1, starting in verse 1. It said, "Now these are the names of the sons of Israel who came to Egypt with Jacob. They came each one with his household: Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, and Benjamin, Dan and Naphtali, Gad, and Asher. All the persons who came from the loins of Jacob were 70 in number. But Joseph was already in Egypt. Joseph died, and all his brothers and all that generation. But the sons of Israel were fruitful and increased greatly and multiplied and became exceedingly mighty, so that the land was filled with them." So here we have our prologue between the two books. He's saying this is what happened. Here's what's going on. Now there is a whole bunch of them in this land. And when we see here is it says these are the sons of Israel. Now, when it says that, remember, Jacob's name was changed to Israel when he wrestled with God and all that. So that's what we're saying, literally, his sons. But they're saying he became exceedingly mighty and filled the land. So realize what happened here. It says here about 70 people came. It started with 70. And then now it turns into, especially by the time we get to the end of the story of Exodus, when they actually leave Egypt, what scholars believe is probably around 2 million people. So we go from 70 all the way up to 2 million. And this is a fulfillment of a promise of God. Because this is something that when we look at God's promises, he makes these promises, and sometimes one may think okay, this is going to happen. It's going to happen now. It's going to happen quickly. But this is something that took generations. And we may be thinking, well, what promise was that? Well, let's go back to Genesis chapter 12. Again, the start of this book just assumes we know this, but we're going to read it. Chapter 12, verse 1. "Now the Lord said to Abram, go forth from your country and from your relatives and from your father's house to the land which I will show you. And I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great. And so you shall be a blessing. And I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse those who I will curse. And in you all the families of the earth will be blessed." So we have two promises here. The second one that we read there, that all the families of the earth will be blessed, that's the promise that is fulfilled with us today. With Jesus, with his sacrifice, his death, his burial, his resurrection, all the families of the earth are now blessed because of what Jesus did. Jesus' lineage goes all the way back to Abraham. So that promise has been fulfilled. But in that first promise, where he says he's going to be a great nation, has been fulfilled by the time of these events of Exodus 1. And so something we can already take from this is something that we've mentioned before, but I believe it's good to be reminded of this consistently, is that God always keeps his promises. And I believe this is important. It's important to remember, not just because of how the story continues over the course of this book, but it's important to remember for all of us because it's easy to forget. And we see throughout this book, we're going to see that it is easy to forget because the Hebrews forgot it quite a bit throughout this. Even after everything they're going to see, the major stuff that you already know about the story, they're going to see these amazing things, and they continue to forget about God keeping his promises. And see, I think the problem with that is because when things are going bad, when things are hard, or things aren't going our way, it's easy for us to be like, man, I thought God had promised to take care of these things. I thought God had promised to see me through. I thought God had promised to continue to help me and bless me. Like I thought God promised all these things. So when things go hard, it gets tough to remember them. But on the flip side, when things are going great, it's easy to remember everything God promised, right? When things are great, that's when we're just like, oh yeah, that's right. God did promise for this to happen. He did say, if I come to him, then he will answer prayers. And then he's answered it. And sometimes he answered it in a way I didn't even think about. So yes, like it's easy when things go well. It's when things go wrong is when we tend to forget. The Hebrews struggle with that. We struggle with that now. This is why it's good to know all of God's promises. And I want to read a couple here for us. The references are just be on the screen because if not, I would be putting poor Brent back there, his finger to work. He'd probably get a finger cramp going through this too much. But I'm just going to read them. The references are just up top. But listen to these promises from God. Psalm 37, starting in verse 23. The steps of a man are established by the Lord, and he delights in his way. When he falls, he will not be hurled headlong, because the Lord is the one who holds his hand. We have Isaiah chapter 26, verse 3. The steadfast of mind you will keep in perfect peace, because he trusts in you. Trust in the Lord forever, for in God the Lord we have an everlasting rock. Isaiah 40, verse 31. Yet those who wait for the Lord will gain new strength. They will mount up like wings on wings with eagles, on wings like eagles. Don't know why I can't read today. I'm sorry. They will run and not get tired. They will walk and not become weary. And then next chapter, 41, starting verse 10. Do not fear, for I am with you. Do not anxiously look about you, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. Surely I will help you. Surely I will uphold you with my righteous hand. We have John chapter 16, verse 33. These things I have spoken to you, Jesus' words, so that in me you may have peace. In the world you will have tribulation, but take courage. I have overcome the world. And we have 2 Corinthians chapter 12. This is Paul speaking about going through struggles. And he says this in verse 9. And he has said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for power is perfected in weakness. Most gladly, therefore, I will rather boast about my weakness so that the power of Christ may dwell in me. Therefore, I am well content with weaknesses, with insults, with distresses, with persecutions, with difficulties, for Christ's sake. For when I am weak, then I am strong. Now, all these verses, these promises have a theme here. Is like, yes, we may go through some things. We may struggle at times. Like we're going to struggle. Because we're in a world that is full of sin. We're in a world that there's a lot of people that are actively trying to work against God, against his will. So we're followers of Christ, like we're going to struggle. But we're seeing here that as we struggle, God will see us through. All these verses said he'll see us through. You think you can't, like with the last one, like you think you're weak? Well, that's all right. God is strong when we are weak. He will continue to see us through everything. Now, why do I bring all this up? Well, first of all, we've already have, like I said, this evidence of God keeping his promises with the nation growing. He said Abram will be a great nation. Now he is. And the second part is the story is about to shift, right? Like it starts off promising. It's like, this is great. This sounds awesome. Look, God has kept his promise. But the story is about to take a dark turn. Things are about to get worse for God's people. And so this is what we talk about. It's hard to remember God's promises when things go bad, right? Let's see what happens next, verse 8. Now a new king arose over Egypt, who did not know Joseph. He said to his people, behold, the people of the sons of Israel are more and mightier than we. Come, let us deal wisely with them, or else they will multiply, and in the event of war, they will also join themselves to those who hate us and fight against us and depart from the land. So they appointed taskmasters over them to afflict them with hard labor. And they built for Pharaoh storage cities, Pithom and Ramses. So we see here this new Pharaoh arises. And when he comes up, the memory of Joseph, everything he did, why his family was there, why these people are living in the Delta region, the whole history of these people, the memory's gone. It's gone. Like this was not something that was passed down. It was just something that is. There's this group of people, these Hebrews that are living in this region. That's it. Like we know who they are, the sons of Israel, but everything Joseph did, everything he done, forgotten. And since it was forgotten, all this new Pharaoh does is he sees this massive group of people, and it freaks him out. He gets scared. And one might naturally think, like, what could they have possibly done? Like, were they doing things that made Pharaoh look at him and go, man, like these guys, they're rowdy, they're rough. Like, I don't know about them. No. What freaked him out was there's a lot of them. There's a lot. Their numbers are huge. And so he sees their massive number. It freaks him out. And then he starts to think, what if our enemies attack us? Man, if they join them, we're cooked. There's nothing else for us to do. There's way more of them already than of us. So if someone else and they come together, oh my goodness. But of course, like, well, where's evidence of this? Where's the evidence of these people would want to do such a thing? Because up until this time, they're not slaves. They're just living there peacefully amongst the beautiful regions of Egypt. So they live there freely without a care in the world. So there's really no evidence to anything that Pharaoh's thinking. He's just thinking this because of a what if. What if? And see what Pharaoh does, he's about to commit atrocities because of his anxious thinking. Now, I know most people will come here and say, well, Pharaoh is actually operating from fear. And yes, fear and anxiety and anxious thinking are similar, but they're still different. You see, because fear is the response to a specific, immediate, present danger. Meaning, like, I can literally see danger about to hit me. I'm overcome with fear. But the anxiety or anxious thinking is a long-lasting feeling of worry about potential future threats. So for one, with fear, you have evidence of something, there's present danger, something, I can see it, I know it, I can feel it, like it's right there. You see it happening. That's where fear comes in. This anxious thinking, this anxiety is about what ifs. And this is where Pharaoh is operating from. He has no evidence that the Hebrews are going to do anything like this or that they have any malice toward them. He has zero evidence of this. He just sees the massive number and he's worried about the potential threat. Like what it says there, he says, in the event of war. Those are his words. In the event. If someone happens to go to war with us, if some other country decides, let's take down Egypt, he also has no evidence of any other country wanting to go to war with him. So zero evidence. There's a lot of people. They could do us in. I'm freaking out. So he gives into this worry because he's not thinking clearly. And he starts to make decisions that will ultimately lead, ironically, to the end that he was trying to avoid anyways. But he makes things terrible. He decides that the best course of action is to enslave the Hebrews and work them hard. And he's thinking, man, maybe if I work them really, really hard, they'll be too busy and too tired to be making babies and popping out babies. Maybe that's the key. We're going to have to stop them from procreating. And what he ends up doing here, a couple things, is first is he tries to stop them from multiplying. And then what he does is he tries to take this opportunity to grow his kingdom and make his name great, to try to make sure that everyone understands he is the almighty Pharaoh. And so there are some big problems with this Because what Pharaoh does is he continually tries to elevate himself as the God of his people, one of the gods of Egypt, but also the God of the Hebrews. Because what he does here, God has given people the command. In the creation account, there's a creation mandate that God gave Adam and Eve, and then he also gave it to Noah and his sons and their wives, and he said, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. One of God's creation demands is to procreate, to fill the earth with people. God wants that to happen. That is his will, that more and more people will be on this earth. So he's out there and he's like, yes, go out, make some babies. In the context of marriage. Calm down, teens. But he's like, do it, procreate. So what Pharaoh does here, he is trying to stop God's creation mandate. He's directly going against it. He wants God's people to stop doing what God told them to do. And then he starts to use them. Not only is he trying to stop that, now he's going to try to use them to say, hey, you're going to end up working for me to make my name great. And he starts to build, as he saw, these storage cities. Basically on a bigger scale, but what Kernersville is kind of turning into, a bunch of storage units and warehouses everywhere. Which one of those I think should belong to Ohana, but that's besides the point. But this is what he's trying to do, right? He just wants to build these storage cities so he can have all of his stuff, all of his riches, all of his awesomeness, just all stored somewhere. So, because for them, for the Egyptians, when they died, they believed like, hey, let's put everything in there so he can take it with him to the next life. And of course, they don't want anyone stealing their stuff. So he wants to store everything up so he can show for all eternity how great he is. He's trying to elevate himself to a place that he doesn't belong. And seeing all this starts to take place because of Pharaoh trying to take God's place as the ultimate authority. See, God isn't a part of the equation here. So because of that, all these things are starting to go wrong. And it makes me think of this time when I try to cook. I like to cook. I think it's a whole lot of fun. But then Katie tries to do something that's stretching me, is probably the best way to put it. Because with me, it's very easy. Obviously, Hispanic. Rice, beans, and meat. Made differently, all tasty. All right, so I really have like my area of expertise. If she wants me to go out of that, I'm like, I got you with some mac and cheese and hot dogs. I make a mean one since I was 6. I got that recipe down, right? Like, but then she's like, hey, I really want meatloaf. And I looked at her and I was like, is there an American that can do that? Because I don't know. But she's like, I just follow a recipe, you'll be fine. Okay, guys don't follow instructions well. And so I'm sitting here and I'm like, okay, fine, I'll just get a recipe, I'll get it going. So I start and I'm going through and I'm making it. And then Kay's like, let me check it. She gets off work, so let me check it, let me see. And then she looks at it, she says, it doesn't look right. And I was like, I don't know. I mean, I know what it's supposed to look like. I know what it's supposed to taste like. Because when you make it, Katie, it's delicious. But I don't know. Does it look okay? I haven't put the little sauce on it. It's like, I don't know. So eventually we keep cooking it and then we pull it out. And then when I pull out this meatloaf, I realize it's essentially a giant hamburger patty. It is not meatloaf in the slightest. So Katie looks at it, she cuts into it, and she asks me a question. She goes, did you put eggs in this? And I was like, eggs? What are you talking about, eggs? She's like, you're supposed to put eggs in meatloaf. And I go, really? I go back and I start looking. There is literally one line in this recipe, add eggs. That's all it says. I overlooked it. I had no idea. So I had this giant hamburger patty. Of course, Kate and the girls were like, we ain't eating that. And I was like, I got to eat some of it out of principle. Like, this is a lot of meat. I can't waste this. It was disgusting, by the way. It was atrocious. So don't ever ask me to make you meatloaf. Rice, beans, chicken, I got you. Not meatloaf. But I was missing this key ingredient, eggs. Something that would have made it perfect. It would have came out the way it's supposed to be. But these are the kinds of things that happen. Like when you have the missing ingredient. And when we look at it, when God is excluded or removed from people's lives and society, bad things happen. It just does, because as humans, on our own, without God's guidance, we make stupid decisions. We make decisions that will elevate ourselves or elevate our status, or we're very inwardly thinking. We'll treat people badly because people are just someone else to help us get what we want. And it's easy for us to inflict suffering on one another because, again, people are just a means to an end. See, when God is missing, bad things happen. And this is what's happening with Pharaoh. And it's easy to see this because with these pharaohs at this time, every pharaoh in Egypt, they did believe themselves to be deities. Like they did. They thought they were divine beings chosen by the gods to rule over Egypt, and therefore they would also be elevated as a deity. So for Pharaoh, yeah, he had every right to try to stop procreation. He felt that he had the right to make them enslaved and make them work for his honor and for his greatness, because he is this deity that is worthy to be worshipped. This was his mindset. But of course, this kind of thinking comes at the expense of the Hebrews. And what is already happening here, and what this first chapter really tries to drive home, is Pharaoh is being introduced to us as this anti-God figure. He's the one who's going to be actively working against God and actively working against his will. And because of this, God's people are stuck in the middle, and they're the ones that are collateral damage. So what the book of Exodus wants to show is that people tend to think that, look at God being vengeful, trying to get us out. Listen, Pharaoh's the one who declared war on God first. That is what's happening. He tries to play God. He tries to stop God's will. He's declaring war. So let's see what happens from his efforts here. Verse 12. But the more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied, and the more they spread out, so that they were in dread of the sons of Israel. The Egyptians compelled the sons of Israel to labor rigorously, and they made their lives bitter with hard labor and mortar and bricks, and all kinds of labor in the field, all their labors which they rigorously imposed on them. So his grand plan, right, completely backfired. The more he pushed them, the more they reproduced. It didn't change a thing. Nothing happened. Really? Why? Because God's will can't be stopped. It can't. He can think all these things about himself. He can think he's this amazing deity, this divine being. He can think all these things, but he's not God. He's not going to stop what God is doing. But something to see here that some people don't, it's just hard to think about, people don't really want to talk about it, is that it made their lives worse. Even though they did nothing wrong, even though he couldn't stop God's will is still being worked out. Being in God's will doesn't mean things will be easy. The Hebrews are in God's will. They're reproducing. They're doing what God wants them to do. But they got harder work. Things got pushed. And this is where people think, like, when people talk about Christianity, when people talk about following God, and people, again, have this mentality, if you're following God, if you're in his will, everything should be easy. Life should be easier, right? But for all of us, we know, like, when we know we're in God's will, when we're working things out, man, sometimes it comes with a lot of heartache, a lot of pain, suffering, persecution. I mean, you see this. You may be thinking, yes, I'm out here. I'm praying with people. I'm visiting people. I'm trying to do things by the scriptures. I'm trying to do the best I can. And then we're met with being made fun of for trying to follow the scriptures. Telling us that, oh, well, you're just taking things too far. You don't want to be that way. And then people lie about us. People slander our name. People may push you out, exclude you. And we're just thinking, like, well, why is this happening? And then what happens in our minds is we start to think, man, we're going through all this. We're trying to stay in God's will. These things are getting bad. And you know what? Not even are those things bad from other people, but man, my life isn't necessarily the best. Maybe we're thinking, like, man, you would think that God, just because I'm following him, hey, God, you would at least make sure financially I'm okay. You think I should be well taken care of, that you think I'm making good decisions for myself and my family. Like, you would help me with that. You would help me to make sure my kids don't fight. Because, Lord, I could use some peace. They're just like this all the time. Can I drop kick them, God? Okay, no, fine, I won't. But we think maybe our car shouldn't break down, house stuff shouldn't break. It's like, God, just give us a break. Please, a break, God. There's just too much. I'm trying to do everything you want, but where's this break? One would think all this, but this is very human thinking. And I say this because when I go through these same exact struggles of all these things that I've just mentioned, when I go through them and I start this down the spiral, eventually I wake up Because either someone has to give me a kick in the pants and be like, dude, you know the scriptures, like, calm down. I start to realize something, that when I put my faith in God's will, my needs are always met. So just because things aren't easy doesn't mean my needs aren't met. So then I start to think, and I'm like, yeah, things are really hard. Yeah, I'm going through stuff. Yes, I'm tired of the way people treat me. I'm tired of going through this struggle. I'm tired of it. But you know what? At the end of the day, no matter what I'm going through, I have food. I have a home. I have clothing on, which is to all of your benefit, by the way. I have transportation. I have my family. I have my church family, who always helps me through these difficult times. You know, all these needs that I have them. Like, they're there. At the end of each day, it's fine. And even the needs and stuff that I have, I can always use that and turn around using it for others in God's kingdom. So yeah, we may look back and think of the long list of things that I don't have, or maybe I'm struggling with, when can we buy food? Even though I have all these struggles, or maybe even worse, when I start looking at people who aren't God-fearing, and I'm like, why do they get all that? And I don't. I work hard for the little I have, right? Like, we have these thoughts. But again, when I get out of my own head, I realize at the end of each day, which Jesus says, pray, give us today our daily bread. This day, I've eaten, I've worn clothes, I've got to where I needed to go, I have a family to come home to, I have a home to walk into, I have a warm bed to sleep on, I can take a shower, thank God. Man, so much is met. I'm worried about all the extra things and what they have and all my needs are always met. I may have done nothing wrong, but my needs are met. Just because I'm in God's will doesn't mean things are going to be easy, and this is where the Hebrews are. The Hebrews have done nothing wrong. They have done nothing wrong. All they have done is have babies. Oh no. They've been having babies. That's all they did. They've done nothing wrong. They've lived peacefully among the Egyptians. They've gone about their business. They've lived their lives, probably paid their taxes. But because of the sin of one man, they're all suffering. And sometimes that's what happens in life. We may be in God's will. We may be doing everything right. We may be on track exactly where He wants us to go. But we will suffer because of the sins of others. Because everybody has the choice to sin or to follow God. And when sin is involved, people get hurt. And that's what ends up happening. But that doesn't mean that God isn't working through all the circumstances, because what it does call us to do is, yes, you're in my will. We'll continue in my will. Endure, persevere, stand firm in the faith. Continue following me. God is continuing to work, regardless of what the sins of others have an effect on us as doing. And we go through this because things start to get even worse. Verse 15. Then the king of Egypt spoke to the Hebrew midwives, one of whom was named Shiphrah and the other who was named Puah. And he said to them, when you are helping the Hebrew women to give birth and see them upon the birth stool, if it is a son, then you shall put him to death. But if it's a daughter, then she shall live. Pharaoh now moves to commit genocide. Not because of any real threat or any imminent danger, not because of any evidence of anything that he brought together, just because of the potential threat to his way of life. He moves to this genocide because of his anxious thinking of what could happen. And this mindset, unfortunately, is too familiar in history. And probably the most notable one that everyone knows would be that of Hitler and his hate for the Jews. You know, and partial reason, there's a list, right? But partial reason for his hate is because he believed that Germany had become weak because of all the Jewish influence. See, he had this idea in his head that the Jews were slowly trying to take over Germany and that they were putting themselves in positions of power, political power, and just trying to go up, to try to move up the ladder, to try to reshape all of Germany. So he thought that they were doing this because they wanted world domination. So he feared that if this continued, that they would get it and that Germany would become a shell of itself. Again, anxious thinking, right? He thinks this is what's going to happen. Did he really have a lot of evidence? No. He just had this idea. So Hitler decides, I'm going to insert myself into the political world, and then the rest is history. We know what happened. He decided to do exactly what he thought the Jews were doing. And look at the atrocities he committed. Because when humans react and make decisions only based on feelings and anxious thoughts and worry, usually we make pretty bad decisions. Now, Pharaoh and Hitler are extreme examples. But it all started in the same place. You know, this hatred was born for the Jews, for the Hebrews, from both of these men because of misplaced fear and worry about things that just aren't true, that it's all just speculation. And again, this is what happens when God is in the center of our lives. We make these human decisions instead of godly decisions. Because when human decisions over godly decisions are made, people suffer and lives can be lost. So what do we do? What do we do when we see something like this happen, when we are faced with atrocities, when we are faced with suffering? You know, what if the suffering and things escalate because we're trying to do our best and we're not doing anything wrong, but it escalates? What do? We continue, verse 17. But the midwives feared God and did not do as the king of Egypt had commanded them, but let the boys live. So the king of Egypt called for the midwives and said to them, why have you done this thing and let the boys live? The midwives said to Pharaoh, and I wonder if there was a little sarcasm here, because the Hebrew women are not as the Egyptian women, for they are vigorous and give birth before the midwife can get to them. So these two midwives, Shiphrah and Puah, are in this position where the Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, the king under the land that they're living, comes and gives them instructions to kill the baby boys. As these baby boys are coming out, if you see it's a boy, kill it right then and there. This is the instruction because he wants to stop the procreation. And they know good and well that if they disobey, their lives could be at stake. They could lose their lives for not obeying this king. So their choices are to obey the king or die. This is what they do. But notice a very important word to the start of verse 17. It says, the midwives feared God. Yes, these midwives feared Pharaoh. They knew the situation they were in. This was a scary situation. But they feared God more. They may fear man, but they feared God more. They knew what he was asking, but they also knew God. They knew his standards, his words, his promises. Listen, they looked at it like, yeah, this is scary, but God has way more power than this guy. We fear him way more. So when they are told by their human government to do something that goes against God, they said no. They weren't going to do it. And I think they set an important precedent for us that if we're to fear anything, fear God. Don't fear anything else. Just fear God. Because fearing God will keep us in his will, even when things are really, really bad. Fearing God will help us to hate sin and to seek to be free from it. Fearing God will help us to see others as he sees them. Fearing God will give us the courage to do what is right, even if the consequences are death. See, our fear of God will keep us in his will no matter what happens. Even if things get worse, we may be doing everything right, things get worse. Fear of God will be right where we need to be. You know, I brought up already Hitler in World War II, so we're going to go back into it and talk about a man by the name of Caspar ten Boom, which is an awesome name, by the way. Caspar ten Boom. Pretty epic. But he was a Christian man who was a watchmaker, and he employed a lot of people. This is a man that he would every single day, before the day would start, he would lead his family and his employees in a Bible study. This is how committed this man was. He loved the Lord. He taught it to his family. He even taught it to his employees. So then when Hitler was doing what he's doing. World War II started to stretch, and the 10 booms as a whole, Casper and his wife and his children, when they heard about what's happening, and then once Holland got invaded where he was at, his heart started to break for the Jews once he started hearing exactly what was going on. So he made a decision, when presented with the opportunity, we are going to help them because what is happening is wrong. So they had plenty of places to hide them, to help them escape the clutches of the Nazi regime. Like they did all this. They were part of the underground system to get Jews out and to get them to safety. Well, now Casper's daughter, we know a lot about these stories because his daughter Corrie ten Boom famously wrote a book called The Hiding Place, where she talks about all these things, everything she witnessed and what her dad did. And there is something that she writes in here that I'll read to us where she talks about really her disappointment in a Christian pastor who wasn't willing to risk his life to help these people. And this is what she says. Unseen by either of us, meaning herself and the pastor, Father had appeared in the doorway. Give the child to me, Corrie, he said. Father held the baby close with his white beard brushing his cheek, looking into the little face with eyes as blue and innocent as the baby's own. At last he looked up at the pastor. You say we could lose our lives for this child. I would consider that the greatest honor that could come to my family. This is the kind of man he was. This is a man that, when you read more of his story, you would look at and be like, nothing bad should ever happen to this man, ever. He followed God. He led his family. He led his employees to Christ. He led them in Bible studies. Like, this man was committed to God no matter what. And then he's part of the underground system where he's getting Jews out to save their lives because of the genocide that was happening. Look at all this man had done. But it didn't end that way. Him and his family get taken captive and they go to one of the concentration camps where Casper ends up dying at the concentration camp. Now, his daughter Corrie is the only one who survived, and that's why she wrote the book, The Hiding Place, where she's just talking about everything her dad and her family, what they all went through to do what they felt God wanted them to do, was to save the lives of Jews. See, so we may look at this and think like, man, why wouldn't, if I'm in his will, everything should be perfect. Man, we just have story after story. In Scripture, here's one story where, yes, it didn't end great on earth. I'm sure there was a party in heaven once Casper got there because he followed Christ. But this is what happens when people like Casper fear God more than they fear men. And you may understand that giving our life for the sake of others, you'll understand this, that is the most Christ-like thing we can do. I mean, Jesus literally gave his life for us. So for us to give our lives for someone else, that is the Christ-like thing to do. And he was willing to do that. So many other stories were willing to do that. And then we have these two midwives here, Shiphrah and Puah, who did the same thing. They said, it's worth risking our lives to save the lives of these babies because they feared God more than they feared the Pharaoh. Even though Pharaoh wanted to take these agents of life, right? These ladies whose job is to help life come into being. He wanted to turn them into agents of death. But they said no at the threat of their own life. Now, what's ironic is that Pharaoh, who is trying to make his name great, who's trying to make all these things happen, he wants to be the king, the deity, right? He's all amazing on himself. We never know his name. There's still speculation to this day of which Pharaoh this could be, but we have no idea who they are. But these two Hebrew midwives, Shiphrah and Puah, who feared God instead of man, we're still talking about them today. Because they followed God. Because they feared God. Even though all these bad things were happening to them, they did not care because their fear of God overcame any fear of man or any fear of suffering or anything that was happening. Their names are recorded in this book. Pharaoh is just Pharaoh, which means king, the king. Just this one. He wanted to make his name great, but God made sure that no one remembered his name. But remember the name of those who feared God and stayed in his will. And see, what we see starting off even in this chapter is that God's people will always face persecution from those who oppose God and the fulfillment of his will on earth. It's just going to happen. It's just been that forever. The sins of others and people trying to go against God always persecute the people of God. That will always happen. That will continue to happen for multiple reasons. But when persecution comes, and I'll end on this question for us today, when that persecution comes, when all these things are happening, when we feel like we're suffering, we feel like everything's going wrong, and maybe we're even threatened. The question for us is, will we fear God or will we continue to fear man?